Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Community Central. Today, we are going to be talking about something that a lot of folks in open source and in other kinds of communities are facing right now, which is how do you take events that you used to have in person, or how do you create new events and have them online so that we don't all get sick? And I will have three panelists with me, but first, some things. There is a Q&A panel in your browser or app interface. If we will be taking questions from the panel after a few initial questions, we'll be taking questions from you for the panel. So please ask your questions there. And be patient, and we will get to them and have the panel try to field them about running virtual events. And then to get started, we have our three panelists today, all from our general cloud native community, where we have a lot of experience running things online. We have Jorge Castro, who works for VMware. He's co-chair or co-chair-elect for SIG Contributor Experience, which runs a lot of the contributor events. He also has some other experience running online events that he'll talk about. We have Kim McMahon, who is the Director of Marketing for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. She also runs the CNCF's online content. And we have Louis Denham-Parry. I got that right, yeah? Terrific. Who works for ControlPlane.io, but more importantly is here because he's co-founder of the Cloud Native Wales Meetup, and that's as in the place. We are going to get started. If each of you can tell us about one sort of virtual event or online program that you ran or running in the near future, and how it worked. Louis, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll jump in and thank you for the introduction. So, yeah, I'm Louis. I'm part of Cloud Native Wales. I'm the co-founder of that. And if you don't know where Wales is, we're part of the United Kingdom, and we like to think that England is our sidecar. And so at our last meetup, we run a monthly meetup. We've been doing it for over 2 years now, and it's all been about community. It's by trying to build up this community, this network that we have physically around us based in Wales. A lot of the time I was having to go to London for meetups and conferences, and we wanted to bring it back to people who are less fortunate, who weren't able to get to these places, and to bring the content to them. So last month we had a meetup scheduled, and building up to this meetup, it was in line with the virus. And as we got closer, a week before our meetup, we found that the speaker didn't feel too comfortable coming across to Cardiff, and completely understood. So we then converted the meetup to an Ask Me Anything. 24 hours before our meetup started, the office where we'd usually host it, they closed the office down because of a virus. At that moment in time, we had the option to either go to another office or we could go online. And when you run a meetup, it isn't just a couple of people who stand up at the front to organize it. There's lots of people who are involved within this, and I didn't feel comfortable putting them in a position to try to host this event. So we looked at putting our MVP in place just within 24 hours to get it up online. We were lucky enough to have a local company give us access to the Zoom account, so we put that URL out. I think we were one of the first people on Meetup who had the problem of trying to update our physical location as to where the meetup was happening. So we ended up putting the meetup in the middle of a river in the city center just to ensure that no one would turn up. But that's since been updated. And it was, and the other thing that we found out was we pivoted what our talk was actually going to be. We had a solutions engineer from GitLab who's based in Newport, which is a town in Wales. He came and gave a talk about working remotely. And because at that moment in time, there's lots of people who are finding this disruption. There's people who have been based in the same office for the last 10 years who only work on site, who have now been told to work home. So we focus our meetup on helping people getting up and starting being remote first. And we had some Well, it was a great meetup. We had lots of conversations from it, and we put it up on YouTube afterwards. So we finally got to record one of our meetups and put it online as well.
Cool. Okay. Actually, let me briefly introduce. We just had our fourth panelist made it in. This is Sheeri Cabral, who works for MongoDB. I know her as a leader of the MySQL community. Are you still leader of the MySQL community, Sheeri? Oh, your mic is not working. Okay, we'll get back to Sheeri when she's got her mic straightened out. In the meantime, Kim, do you want to talk about a virtual event that you've run?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, super. There's no picture of me, but okay. Yeah, I am the Director of Marketing for CNCF. And for our virtual events, Josh, you invited me, and thank you for the invitation. You invited me because of the CNCF webinar program. We run a pretty successful webinar program. I'm pretty excited to share all that with you. And that has turned into even a more popular program and with more people attending and more people wanting them now that we don't have any, though that the in-person events are on hold. So I'll be looking forward to sharing more about that through your questions today.
Okay. Hey, Sheeri, can we hear you now?
Can you?
Yes.
Excellent.
There we go.
Excellent. Thank you. So I actually changed careers. I'm no longer in the MySQL community. I just had a natural break a couple years ago when I had kids, and so I stopped doing so many events. But yeah, I was a community leader, and by that I mean I was not an employee of MySQL, right. But I organized a lot of conferences, Open SQL Camp, right? So Josh and I worked together on a lot of that because he represented Postgres there. And
do you want to talk about an online event that you've run?
Yeah, I ran a mini conference, which had a couple of tracks at once. It worked pretty well. And I have feedback on that we can talk about when we get to other panel questions. And I've also been a participant in a 24-hour one-track conference put on by Oracle. And I have also been a long time recorder and putting up of conference presentations up on YouTube. So I ran a not-for-profit that did that. So I definitely have a lot of experience in kind of engaging after the event as well.
Okay, and George, you want to talk about one of the various online events?
Sure. So I'll concentrate on one. So I'm George. I work at VMware on Kubernetes as a community manager. And one of the first things I started so initially it was just the project always has kind of had video meetings since I got there. So the initial phases where, wouldn't it be neat if we just made these certain important meetings more publicly accessible by broadcasting them on YouTube and so on. And then after that, it became kind of apparent. If those of you that play video games, if you watch our Twitch streamers and whatnot, you see all these cool tools that they're using for like playing video games and keeping track of stuff and keeping the audience engaged. So I was like, you know what? I want to do this, but for Kubernetes. So we started an office hours program and a Meet Our Contributors program that in the past would have been done in IRC or in Slack or something like that. And then we just adapted that to an online format. We have a little chat bar that people join. We have little contests to give away T-shirts, just something to make it a little bit more interesting than a typical quote-unquote online session. And then in the past, when I worked at Canonical, Ubuntu kind of went through this phase where we moved from physical, very large events to, well, not as large as CNCF, but developer events moving into an online-only format in Google Plus back in the day. And there was I was just thinking there was a lot of tools that we had that solved a lot of these problems that no longer exist, which is a shame. But I've been doing virtual stuff a lot now. I only realized now when I started to add it up and preparing for this. So looking forward to your questions.
Okay. Well, we're starting to accumulate some audience questions, but I want to ask one other one now, which is Despite all efforts, there are some differences between in-person and online events. So can you each talk about one of those differences and what you do to either sort of overcome or offset it? In terms of things you can't do online or things you can do online or whatever. So let's rotate around. Let's go ahead and start with Kim this time.
Hi. So, Josh, your question is the difference. How do we convert an online event?
One aspect of in-person events and online events that has to be handled very differently.
Hallway tracks. And so I'm working with the community on an event that we have, a Cloud Native online event that is coming up next week, and how we are going to create that kind of in-person interaction, the thing that you get by seeing people in person. And I don't know. So we're trying it with we're going to try it with the breakout room functionality within Zoom, where people are just going to get in a room. We're going to have moderators trying to encourage conversation. But I'm very curious how that is going to work. I've not participated in an event that's tried to bring people together and have that kind of networking and just kind of open, casual conversation. So that's one area that I'm personally very interested in learning about.
Okay. George, you want to talk about that?
I feel like the only right answer is the hallway track. So I'm just going to talk about how I tried to fix that, because I feel like the hallway track, actually, when you think about it, having events virtually is so much nicer than like dealing with a conference venue and all that stuff. But the hallway track is so valuable. So what I've tried to do this cycle specifically now, because obviously we canceled KubeCon and we can't go, is making a concerted effort to have a one-on-one with someone. So I got this idea from Dustin Kirkland one day, just called me and says, hey, there's no KubeCon. You want to hang out for an hour and just talk? And we kind of replicated that a little bit. And then at the end, we both agreed, okay, here's someone I think you should call, and here's someone I think you should call. And we kind of try to spider it out to make it a little game. But the thing that you miss there is the kind of randomness of a conference where you turn around and you're like, oh my goodness, I haven't seen you in 4 years. What are you working on? It just so happens that you might be working on the same thing now or the same project and you didn't know it, and then like there have been so many times at conferences where the value is the surprise, not the, hey, Josh, I'll see you in 3 weeks because I'll always see you at this conference. It's usually someone that you hadn't seen in a while or had maybe left the industry and come back, and just has like great stories and great experiences. I have not found a way to replicate that virtually. The closest I think we can get is like try to find a random person that that you can call, and then try to like whether that's hanging out in a Slack channel or something, a virtual equivalent of something. Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do. Just call randoms.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Sheeri, do you want to tackle the hallway track question, or do you want to take a different aspect of online versus in-person events?
I completely disagree with George. The hallway track is not the only right answer. The other, when you think about, this is something I've thought about for a long time as someone, again, who recorded a lot of things. And I said, how can we bring in the conference experience to people digitally who maybe can't afford to go, or there's, time issues, right? All that kind of stuff. Something I've been thinking about for like 15 years, ever since I got a video camera and started videoing these presentations. And when you think about going to a conference, most people are like, wow, that's going to be a lot of fun. And when you think about sitting at your desk and watching videos for 8 hours, you say, please give me a fork so I can stab my eyes out with it, right? And so the difference is not only the hallway track. For me, one of the things is having a separate space for a conference, that physical distance, and even that plane ride or that commute. You have this kind of magical temporary world that you're in that hopefully you're not bothered by work too much, right? We definitely know there are people who are on their laptops the whole time. But for me, it's one of those things where I try to disengage from my day-to-day job and I am in the conference. And part of that magical world is the hallway track, right? I could see people that I see at that conference, and that's that magical world. But also there's nobody pulling away at me, right? I don't go to my daily stand-ups. I don't go to my things. When you're sitting at your desk, it's like really easy to be like, well, I won't go to this session, or, getting a Slack message, right? We usually, kind of put our laptops away. There's no such thing as putting your laptop away when you're doing a digital conference, because you're looking at your laptop, right? Now, one of the things you can see I'm doing here with my hands, I do this on purpose so that my hands aren't down on my keyboard clicking, right? So I do this so that it reminds me, don't click onto a tab, right? And that kind of gets into another issue, which is audience engagement. I know we've all been in sessions where people leave the room after the first 10 minutes, or maybe after the first 20 or halfway through, right? There's always a problem with audience engagement, even in live conference sessions. But when you're literally a click away, right, or a shift command square bracket away from the next window, it's really difficult if people are engaged. And that is really, really hard when you have your standard half an hour session. The first 10 minutes are like the guide, and then 5 minutes on here's what I'm going to talk about, right? Like, you can't necessarily do that similar the thing in there. And then hopefully I'm not taking anything away from Lewis, but also the expo hall. So part of the expo hall is that hallway track. Part of it is walking around, and this is the whole conference, not just the expo. Like, actually getting up and walking does something to your brain. You're not thinking about the next thing, right? Not having this immediate switch from one thing to another. You have to get up, you have to walk. Your brain can process what you just learned, right? And you might get more questions. You might think of how it applies to you. But walking around the expo hall, well, first of all, you get swag. Everyone loves swag. And that's something that you get as part of a conference, right? Like candy. Sometimes there are contests that you might take, kind of learn more about a product and get swag, or get entered to a drawing for swag. And that gets people learning about companies. And even if you don't, even if the first thing you do is unsubscribe from all the lists the next week, in your brain, you're like, okay, there are companies now exist that do this, and I've learned it. And then 5 years from now, you might say, oh, I know there are companies that, can sell me data analytics on, SQLite. Like a random thing, right? And so, just that knowledge that you kind of put in the back of your brain. So I think there's a lot that we miss in that. And, just the exercise and the walking. Some people might say the snacks are nice.
I don't know. I generally think the snacks are terrible. But the one thing I don't miss about in-person events is eating a lot of local
the
pizza.
constant pressure to snack. And then everyone's like, oh, they have Haagen-Dazs ice cream bars. And I'm like, I can buy those for $3.
Yep.
They always have the same sandwiches, too. It's always the same terrible sandwiches everywhere in the world.
Okay.
They're all the same.
Anyway.
Yep. So let's give Lewis a chance here, because you just took your in-person meetup and moved it online. So do you want to talk a little bit about sort of recreating the social experience as much as you could?
Yeah. And well, so from the great points that we've had so far, it's thinking about this recently, I've been comparing it a lot to sport. So with sport, if you go to the event itself, it isn't about with soccer, it isn't about the 90 minutes as much as it's about going to meet your friends first, going out for a meal, going out for a drink, then you see the 90 minutes, then you continue afterwards. So it's a day event. I think for me, that's where it all combines. But if you try to compare that with watching it at home, you try to recreate it as much as you can at home, but then you get your friends over, which we can't do at the moment. And you end up watching highlights. So I don't know if that's going to help as well, where we can, instead of trying to focus it on being a 2 or a 3 day thing, we say, well, over a week, I'm going to follow this track, and it's going to be curated. It's going to be a path for me to further learn. But on the back to the meetup level, the one thing that people are going to miss is pizza and beer, I guess. That's going to be the one. But we encourage people to put their favorite food together. You get to go to the meetup and have your favorite food, which is a great thing. In seriousness, though, I think at this time when there's a lot of change happening around us, I've had issues with mental health in the past, and with so much change and not having this consistent pattern every week, things are changing yet again. I think community is the strongest thing that can bring us back together and hold us into the shape as we go through this. I've always felt that technology will change, but the community, the people that we know here, we're going to see them for years and years to come. having that as an advantage if we can find these initiatives, like Georgie was saying, about finding this new network. I'm looking forward to, say, in 5 years' time when it's, oh, how did you meet that person? Well, I saw them first when they were in this spare room on the webcam, but then we've met at the conference after 6 months, and it's a great way to start these communications, which I think we need to really focus on right now. I don't know if that answered any of your question, by the way. But...
Okay, well, we're going to actually have a related question. So I'm going to now start taking questions from the audience because we have a number of good ones. I'm actually going to hold the top-rated question for later because it's a technology question. And I know, at least with me and George, that if we get off into technology questions, that's going to be the rest of the panel. So I want to hold that for later. So instead, we'll go to the next one, which is audience participation. So if we can get down into nuts and bolts of a way that you have encouraged direct audience participation, that you felt was a good way that you recommend, or a way that you thought was going to be good and it didn't work out and you want to recommend that we don't do it. But something about like direct audience participation in the online event. And I think Sheeri's got a lot to say about this, so do you want to kick this off?
I wanted to actually, yes, I can. So one of the ways that you can engage people is with a Slido poll, S-L-I-D-O. And I am actually making one right now. So I kind of would like to, like 2 minutes to make one, but let's see if I can make one now. And basically it's a way to, here we go, do you like polls? Yes. Then clicky. All right, save. And one of the things that you can do is you can create a QR code. And so I've just gotten that to work. And let me see if I can show the QR code. So you get a QR code for your live polls. And let's see. I can't actually do it live while I'm talking. But slido.com, it's free.
Well, here, you know what? Tell you what, we'll skip to one of the other panelists, and then we'll come back to you on this one.
Great, thank you.
So let's see who, George. So let's take audience interaction here.
Sure. So one thing I just found out is the Zoom version that we've been using now has things like polls and stuff integrated, but I haven't investigated into that yet. So do you want me to talk a little bit like how we're integrating like our chat and stuff, or?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to devolve into the tools bit yet, but
no, but just the how we get people to participate and that sort of thing would be nice.
So what we do, the way I'm looking at the chat now of the audience people, and this is something I learned from Joe Bita when he does his podcast, is he encourages the audience to have their own separate conversations, and they start off with something simple like say what you are, where you work, what you're working on, and where you are in the world or whatever. And then as he's doing the show, he goes to the sidebar and says, "Oh, hello, Dave from Cambridge or wherever you're at." And then like as soon as he starts doing that, you can see that the people just start to, the thing starts to scroll fast because people want to tell you where they're from. And then you can have fun little things. Okay, this person is obviously the one, furthest away or the one in a really exotic location. And it gets the audience going. And then something we do is because when we're doing office hours, it tends to be technical and a lot of the audience is technical. While the panelists are discussing these things, and sometimes they have to like peel an onion away, and it takes them a while to explain something, we encourage the audience to be like, look, while we're talking, start whacking in links to GitHub projects that might help with this, other tools in this area, personal stories that you might have. So what we get is while an expert panelist, sorry, I'm trying not to talk too fast, while the expert panelist is explaining something in the basic concepts, you have the audience kind of filling in the blanks with links to documentation, blogs they really enjoyed. Hey, someone did talk about this at a conference I was at. Here's the video. So you kind of get this like side scroll bar action feed, I call it, of people doing it. And then what we do is at the end of the show, I grab all of those URLs and then we shove those in like the YouTube recording show notes or whatever the discussion thread is for that show, and generally try to put them in order. I wish we had the resources to, timestamp every question so users can click on it and get directly. But then we do that, and then usually while I'm assembling the show notes, I might toss that to other people. And then what you do is you end up with, when people end up watching the long tail of your meetings, because usually when we go live, it's in the middle of the workday, and except for like events like this, the live participation might not be as much as you want. So in a lot of ways, I'm kind of prepping it for the recording more than the live session, so that when we actually publish it to people, when they get it through their newsletter or whatever, they kind of have a more more information than just the panelists. It's kind of the community helped to answer the question. And then when you tell them that, they get kind of excited. It's like, all right, everybody, we started this question about ingress. It was really complicated, but look at all the stuff we were able to figure out. And then there's always someone who learns something or either finds a new tool. I consider myself sort of an expert in the field. And every time we have a show, I learn of a new tool. And it's my job to keep track of these tools. But there's nothing I can do better than the entire community. So I try to get the show in and be like, if there's one thing you can help us with the community, share a tool that you might not, think that, the panelists might not know about and stuff. Sorry, that was really long-winded, but that's how I try to make them part of the show. Yeah.
Okay. Are we technologically ready, Sheeri?
I do. Yep. Let me share my screen. Yes. Okay.
Oh, panel
I want
here.
BlueJeans to record my screen. So if everyone can get their phone out and fine. I don't know if BlueJeans would record it. Can you guys see my screen?
It seems to be frozen.
Frozen. Yeah, it needs to. I need to give BlueJeans permission to see the screen. So I can. I would need to quit and redo it. Now this also speaks to rehearsing.
Yes.
So if you have technical tools, you'll be able to do it. And it also speaks to having somebody else on the call to help do your tech. So for example, especially with Slido, you can have your QR codes already set in your presentation, and then you can actually activate them. So you would want somebody else to activate them at the right time.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say not just for text, but it's when you have volunteers, it's important that you assign them. It's like your job is to grab the URLs from chat and put them in this document. And that's all you do. My job will be to host. Your job is to run OBS. That way everyone kind of has a role. It's terrible. I've done things where I've gone halfway through a show and realized I wasn't taking notes.
Okay. So, Kim, ways to encourage audience interaction.
I don't use a lot of tools, not like some of the other people on this call. I kind of revert back to some of the things that I do with an in-person meeting, and that's making sure that everybody has a chance to participate. I think one of the things I'm most worried about with our online meetings, whether they are an online conference or just an online strategy session, is how do we make sure that everybody's voice is heard? And similar to George and Sheeri, you all talked about assigning people roles. Somebody has to have the role to make sure that everybody is called on, everybody's voice is heard. And I will do that even in our, when we're presenting technical content, especially if I found somebody that is asking questions about that content or providing comments about that content in the chat, call on them and give them a chance to participate and share their voice.
Okay, cool. And Lewis, audience interaction.
Yes, so with our meetup, again, we're in the very privileged position where we get about 30 to 40 people. So when we have people physically turn up, we'd usually make sure that when they come through the door, we say, are you new to the meetup? If they are, we have a quick conversation, find out what they're interested in, and try to link them up with people. And then that allows us to, like, other people to come into the community, and then that's how we build these friendships. Now, taking that remotely, we have a code of conduct in place when we have our meetup. It's also at that point now that we do it on remote is to say, this is how to interact with us. Go to this chat channel and funnel it just to have a single chat channel so that people can ask questions there. But the point's already raised by Georgie, like HackMD for me, and just to drop a tool, but HackMD is a great collaborative tool that can allow for this process to continue. So then when we talk about topics, and this is my favorite IDE here, and someone can say, well, actually, I use this one because of this. They can add to the links. And adding that's contributing. And before people know it, they're contributing to a whole document where they've not been comfortable before. So that when we have our meetups in person, when we ask questions, we have to raffle off tickets to get people to raise a hand to ask a question. When you go there at the meetup, personally, when I started going to meetups, I felt like I arguably still do feel like I know the least amount in the room. And so for me to ask a question where I feel like everyone knows the answer is quite intimidating. Having it online, we have a way for people to ask questions, and we don't know who's asked the question, but they can ask it and we can answer it. And then that's just enabling so many more people now to further learn into this. And I think it's just the main thing is if you can help people feel comfortable in this and being able to contribute, then if they can do it at a meetup, then go into their careers in their day-to-day lives, they can have the confidence to stand up to these points whilst we're going through this phase.
Well, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. One quick remark, though. Kim, there's a question that we're not going to get to that was specifically addressed at you in the Q&A. So feel free to answer that via typing. Because looking at the list of questions, we won't get to that one. Instead, we're going to go to the top-rated question that I held off on, and we'll have Lewis start on it because you already kind of talked about this, which is technology. Right. So if you want to talk about, particularly, let's focus on the platforms and the online technologies that you used that you liked, that you felt worked well.
Okay.
So you mentioned HackMD.
Yes, I did mention HackMD. Well, just I guess as a baseline right now, because over the last couple of weeks, I've seen so many people share photos of their home setups. Just make sure you've got a decent microphone if you want to contribute vocally. Having that will go so far. HackMD definitely is a way for people to contribute there. I think to that point as well as a technology, because that doesn't mean that someone has to be at the call during it. They can watch this afterwards. Back to why we did this meetup was to improve it so that people who can attend conferences and meetups can now attend in person. But people who we couldn't reach last time because of geographical issues, if they had childcare, they couldn't get childcare, or they work in second jobs, at this moment in time, they can still go to this and they can continue to contribute as well to these documents. Personally, I don't like using too many technologies in doing this because I've been supporting so many local other non-tech community groups, and any barrier to entry is just a difficulty right now. If we keep it simple and we can build it up from there, if we can find people who want to help, because I'm seeing so many people wanting to help each other right now, if we can find ways that people can support each other to enable others to contribute towards this, then I think so I don't necessarily think it's a tool. I think it's about enabling people to be the tool to help others. That might be a bit corny, but yes.
Okay. Kim, do you want to talk a little bit about technology and platforms in terms of what you liked and why you liked it?
Sure.
What you're using now and why, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, what I'm using now and why, we use Zoom. Meeting for certain events, we use Zoom webinar for our webinars. And so I'm not up on the technology, I will tell you right now. And as people are talking about the different technologies we can add into our Zoom stuff, to broaden it, make it more robust, my eyes kind of glaze over. So what I like about the Zoom webinar for somebody like myself is that it's super duper easy. It's easy for me to set up. It's easy for me to, with our webinar program, to just send automatic emails. It's easy for us to manage it once we're online. It's easy for me to upload my videos to YouTube. So for me, I needed something. I needed that easy button. So I think that we have to remember that there's probably a lot more people like me out there than a lot more people like Josh and George and Sheeri and Lewis who know how to do these more in-depth things. So I just encourage anybody setting up these online programs to make it easy for the people that don't know how to use different technology pieces.
Okay.
Good. I got a few nods.
Yep.
I don't have anybody saying, "Oh my God, that Kim girl," but thank you for the nods. Yeah. Acknowledging my lack of technology expertise.
It's easy to accidentally end up in the rabbit hole of like, what tool am I going to buy and what greens,
Yeah.
like.
So speaking of the rabbit hole,
maybe my content should be better.
Right. Do you want to talk a little bit about the rabbit hole, George?
We could talk a bit. So I see people mentioning HackMD and Etherpad. We used to use Etherpad back in the day. With a tool like HackMD, what I love is it's kind of native Markdown, and it has really nice ability to export to like GitHub gists. And that's really useful for us because it allows us to run our entire show out of a GitHub repository. So we can do things like, you might see in chat someone say, "Oh, it'd be neat if we did this." You can tell them, "Sweet, can you file an issue in the repo?" And then the notes and everything around the show is kind of tied to a GitHub repo. So one of the things I like about HackMD is at the end of the show, we can just export it and commit it, and then it kind of gives us a source of truth for that. For tech, really, I've come to the position where if you can do this like in a project, have one or two people who have like the equipment, right? Like I've got the one nice mic, and there's an open source software called Open Broadcast, OBS Studio, which is just a fantastic piece of software. It like every good thing about open source that you've ever read about is like a program like OBS just gives you the power to do that. So I've been learning a lot of that, more to offer my services to other people in the community who might be like, "Hey, you know what? It'd be neat if we could run our own office hours with like an integrated chat and things." And that tool lets you say, you can kind of canvas out, okay, we're going to put the cameras here, and then over here on the right, I'm going to put Slack, and you resize a little window, and then the Slack channel goes there. And I'm trying to get to the point where if you watch streamers, they gamify a lot of their audience participation, right? Where it's like, ding, Joe Smith is now following your program. So I'm always there's an entire plethora and tools that I cannot mention of plugins and stuff for the software that allow audience participation and things like that. I've not even begun to scratch the surface. I feel that you can keep it pretty simple with just like a HackMD document, a chat, and then your face or their faces. Because I feel like every time we get fancy, like I just bought new gear, I've added a level of complexity to the setup now. So now, before it was like, "Josh, I can't make it. Can you run this office hours?" That was kind of possible a few months ago. It would be really, I've kind of put us in a production quality place now that it would be really difficult for someone to just do that. So now we're trying to figure out things like, can we take the config to all the software, maybe commit it in a GitHub repo so that like Josh could just do a git pull, launch OBS, and everything is magical. We're not there yet, but I'm becoming cognizant of the fact that I'm bringing in a lot of complexity, I guess, is a long-winded way to say in that.
Okay.
Yeah, and Richard is mentioning in chat with the virtual camera. That's my next thing. Yeah.
Okay, sure. You mentioned Slido.
I mentioned Slido, Slido.
Slido. You want to talk a little bit about that?
No, I think people can see that themselves. Someone also mentioned in the chat Mentimeter.com, Mentimeter.com. I do actually want to get to a similar question. Somebody asked or said their experience is that people tend to have a way shorter focus window on online events. So having the same length for sessions as in regular conferences doesn't seem to work well. Do you agree? And I want to say 100%, I do agree. Research that I don't have at the tip of my fingers says that about 10 to 15 minutes is a good time block for engaging people, which is why you see TED Talks that are kind of maximum that length. Personally, I feel more engaged when I see a discussion or an interview as opposed to looking at an endless parade of slides. This also helps, I think, keep people engaged and think, okay, I'll just look at these later. They want to stay in the meeting. So one thing that I've learned is that a discussion or interview helps a lot. If it's a topic where you can talk about the theory, especially with somebody else, maybe show some diagrams, pros and cons, and then get to the nitty-gritty with a couple of slides, that helps. Speakers know that we try to make our sessions, we try to craft them so that we answer people's questions as they come up, right? We know that they're going to think, oh, what about this? Instead of having that in a slide, having another person ask those questions and then answer them can be a lot more engaging. So instead of me having a slide that says, here's how to do foreign keys in MongoDB, Josh could ask me, hey, Sheeri, what about foreign keys in MongoDB? And I could say, I'm glad you asked. So this is something that I've taken from podcasts. I actually did a MySQL podcast for a long time. So that may be something to think about if you've seen podcasts or video casts. What keeps you engaged? I think especially in this time when we don't get a lot of personal interaction, seeing two people have a discussion makes you feel like there is social interaction happening and that you're a part of it.
Or even a panel of 4 people.
Sure.
This
could have been a slide on, here are tools, here are things, but it's way more engaging.
Sheeri, you just reminded me something, Josh, if I could real quick.
Go ahead.
One thing I've been enjoying lately, so I just watched this one yesterday. This is just an example. Spencer Krum, he's a dev advocate at IBM Cloud, and he does these live streams on Twitch. And Joe Bita does this with TGIK, which is a video podcast that we do. And one thing that Sheeri, you just mentioned something that just helped me figure out the audience engagement thing. Is a lot of the times I sit there and I watch them and they have a terminal and they haven't rehearsed. So part of the good thing is watching them make mistakes or figure out what's broken with a thing. We had one session where I was like, this is a total disaster. We never even got the service up and running and whatever. And the audience was like, just seeing how people typing, hey, did you try this? Did you try this? Hi, I'm the author of this library. Trust me, you want to do this, and just watching the audience kind of collectively figure out, even though the show itself was kind of like a failure from, getting the service up and running, people loved watching how other people debug broken stuff and doing it live. It's not fake. A lot of people are just show the terminal. Don't even bother with the slides. Show me the broken stuff. And I think that really resonates, with a lot of technical communities. And it's also less prep as well.
Yeah. I do honestly kind of wish that Twitch would bring back their non-gamer site for this period, actually, because back when they used to have a separate channel for open source stuff, I found actually the Twitch platform to be very good for interactive debugging with an audience.
Yeah, and their chat was IRC, right? So you could connect with any client if you wanted to. It was really nice. Yeah.
So maybe they'll bring that back. I don't know. So I'm going to take one last question that maybe not everybody will answer, and then we're going to wrap up because we're at the end of our time. But I wanted at least Kim to address this question because I thought it was interesting, which is one of the things that's changed now compared to, say, 6 months ago, right, is now all of a sudden every organization is offering online events, right? Because we had to take all of our events online. What's a good way to bring attention to your online events so that people don't forget about them? As the questioner said, we found with the online events, no-show rates are even higher than they were for in-person events. And so do you have some tips on getting people to show up for your online events?
So no show across the board for our webinars, 30% of the people who register, 35% actually show up for the webinar. What I'm finding is that, and what I will tell all of our presenters, all our member companies and projects that present, is that you'll get about, a third of the people will show up, but 5 times the number of people that registered will see that on YouTube. Now, I know that doesn't actually answer your question on how you get them to show up, but for us, the important thing is getting people to see the content. So there's one side of that question is, put the content where people will go and watch that. Now, to promote, you can lead a horse to water, can't make them drink. I can't make people join. One of the things I'm looking at from a CNCF perspective is in the events that we participate in, that they are broad members, that we have a number of members, and that every one of those members and people in the community need to be promoting that event themselves, because then you're not only reaching the audience that knows you, you're reaching the audience that doesn't know you. And that applies to everybody who's part of that event. So encourage social, it's mostly social, some is email type of communications, and encourage everybody who is presenting and participating in the event to promote it. Oh, and I like Dave.
I also wanted to say that you should expect no-shows. As anyone who's done a meetup knows, especially a free meetup, I had a lot of problems. I was getting free pizza and beer, and for a while it was like, I have 3 whole pizzas extra, and there's 10 people in the room trying to get people to do it. So I think it's just a fact of life. You're never going to get 50% even showing up, especially for free and especially for online. There are things you can do. You can make a very small registration fee, $5 US dollars, that kind of thing. Something very small so that people are kind of committed. That increases engagement a little bit in live events. I've never done it for online events. And there are reasons to not worry about engagement, right? People kind of click and then things come up. But I think so just be okay and sit with the fact that, yeah, we have 30% engagement. That's fine.
Okay. So we're kind of at the end of our time. So I wanted to ask each of the panelists if you could just very quickly give one additional tip on running online events to our audience members, anything that you didn't get a chance to say earlier. And then we will close with that. So, George, do you want to start that out?
Sure. I got to think of one, though.
Okay.
Quick
well,
one.
wait. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got one. It's an easy one. URLs. Summit.blah.blah, something that you could put on something that people will remember is key, because for a while we had this long thing and I could never, marketing it was horrible. We do tgik.io/notes. The notes will always be there. So we have a set of convenience URLs, and that really kind of just makes things easier for people.
Yep, and that said, I just posted the bit.ly short URL to the upcoming Community Central schedule in the chat again. Lewis, quick tip?
Yeah, just a quick note as well, just regarding no-shows and such. I've got a friend, Ivan Pajezas, who runs a Kubernetes meetup in London. He said for me from day one, it's quality over quantity. it's when you get people turning up just to eat pizza and beer, that's not really going to work out well. And so just knowing that you're getting it to the people that want it, that's great. I think as meetup organizers, we have to up our game. It's, to Georgie's point, the next meetup we're doing next week, we're doing Capture the Flag, and we're also going to do CubeSim Live. And we're going to do it as a group. So people can contribute. They can say, have you tried doing this? Have you tried doing that? It's to get this interaction back going on. I think it's not going to last forever us doing this, but I think during this time, we just need to focus on user engagement and getting people involved.
Okay. So a last quick tip, Sheeri?
I have two really quick ones. One, virtual swag. Maybe there are credits you can give to something. And again, you could do a raffle, so some kind of incentive. And then the other thing is I forgot. So write down your notes when you have a question so you don't forget like me.
Okay. Last thoughts, Kim?
Yeah, so again, coming from the marketing side, know who your audience is and know what you're trying to accomplish with your event. And if your event is about interaction, then make sure that's what you're communicating about. If it's about how-tos and hands-on, make sure that that's how you are communicating about your event so you get the right people that you want, your audience. So that's piggybacking on Lewis's. It's quality, not quantity.
Okay. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, George, Sheeri, Kim, Lewis. And thank you to the audience. We had a lot of good questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. This video will be up on the Red Hat Community YouTube channel later today, in case you missed anything, want to revisit it. Sorry, and we have additional Community Central videos coming up in successive weeks about all kinds of topics. And thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.